All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Optimizing Live. How are you guys doing today, Randy, Dan?
Glad
Doing
to not
well.
have been blown away by the 90 plus mile an hour winds we had locally here yesterday.
Yeah, just trying to settle everything before the holiday week and doing well.
Yeah, this is our last live stream for 2025. As I said, officially, I think episode 8. So we've had a good run in 2025, getting this live stream up and going and generating, I think, some interesting dialogue around the topic of AI predominantly. So for those of you, maybe you caught one of our earlier live streams, but we've been having this running theme of talking about AI adoption and, how are organizations going about it? What's getting in their way? Which organizations are having success? What does success look like? We had a conversation about ROI. Today, we're going to shift a little bit. We're going to talk about AI adoption as a leadership challenge, not just a technology one. And I think all of us have seen this playing out in organizations and in our own efforts to learn and adopt AI, specifically generative AI, in that, sure, it's technology and it requires certain technical expertise, but the idea of adoption within an organization is tricky and challenging, like any big change. And what we're doing here is we're trying to dissect and deconstruct what some of these challenges are, and hopefully we can help folks out there trying to figure out how to break through, how to get out of pilot purgatory, how to really get AI adding value to the organizations. And this idea of a leadership challenge is not unique, as I mentioned, to any form of transformation. So we're going to dig in that today a little bit. So, Randy, what's your first take on this idea of AI adoption as a leadership challenge?
Well, as with any strategic change, it's multifaceted, and I always like to start with the human-centric angle. So thinking about it through the lens of who are the people in the system and how can AI best support them and help them feel more effective, feel at least no less engaged, hopefully more engaged, and looking at it through those lenses. I'll go back to a prior conversation. I know I've mentioned on past live discussions, and hopefully we can kind of take it at a slightly different angle. But a common theme that we've seen in conversations with organizational leaders is feedback that they're getting from their teams and the team members that, okay, we are using AI, but we're using it in a way that AI is now doing the things that we really like to do. And being a little bit more intentional about how are you evaluating the opportunity, and not just, not creating a system dynamic where the people are going to resist AI because AI it might not be taking their job, but it might be taking the joyous part of their job, right? And looking at how do we balance the way we're using AI so it is more of a partner to the human versus a full-on replacement to the human. I think that's a really interesting angle for leaders to explore, because it's easy to just sort of, run in and say, where can we use AI, and maybe not flesh out the whole big picture, but understanding both sides of the equation. Like, what is this giving us, but like, what is this costing us? And sometimes the thing that AI is costing us is engagement. And you're probably not going to have sustainable success if the things you're doing that might give you, some kind of a near-term hours savings, productivity lift. If you're creating this dynamic in your system where you're slowly increasing the resistance that's coming from the humans in the system. So I think that's one interesting angle. So tying that back to the notion, we've got our 3 pillars. The first pillar is catalyst leadership, rethinking what leadership means, and always being very focused on what's the systemic impact of whatever we're doing, and what kind of a system am I as a leader influencing, and are these changes sustainable? I think that's an important angle.
Yeah, Richard, implementing AI tools is not implementing a strategy. These are 2 different things. Yeah. Often people, mistake, doing some pilots and implementing some technology as their strategy. I'd like to get back to some basics. These really do apply for every transformation that we've seen in this industry. Excuse me, over the years. 20 years ago, agile adoption, maybe 10 years ago, scaled agile. The common elements that made those transformations successful are the same common elements that are required for an AI transformation. And that's really distilling and deciding and getting buy-in on what your approach is. Call it a vision for your organization. That's not implementing tools. That's understanding the tools, the value of those tools, and creating a strategy for your organization. The other thing that's required is governance of that. How do you implement that? Often, having an executive sponsor so that governance team has teeth, a proper way to figure out KPIs for success, for measuring success. But that vision and that governance, and often then goes into a data and security strategy, which still can be housed in that governance, organization or function. But, the first 3 major things, creating that vision, getting a governance together, and addressing your data structure and security have nothing to do with AI technology and everything to do with leadership. So, I think, setting yourself up for success, let's say in 2026, for maybe expediting the value of artificial intelligence within your organization, starts with things that have nothing to do with the technology. Knowledge around that technology helps in crafting that vision and that governance, but that's pre-implementing anything tool-wise. So that is extremely important in my view and my experience.
Yeah, I agree. I'm reminded of a quote. It escapes me where it came from, but it's not about the tools; it's about what you build with the tools, and that, I think, is still an ambiguous objective for some leaders. What are we building? What is AI really doing for us? And I think you're right. We've had this conversation in the past that at a change level, at a transformation level, the fundamentals are the same, right? Understanding, as you said, Dan, whether it's governance, understanding your constraints. What are we trying to accomplish as an organization? But really, what's in our way? And if leadership is not ready or prepared or willing to remove the constraints that need to be removed so that the organization can really go deeper with this transformation, with this change, then you're going to have surface level success. You will have people using tools, doing things, but you may not be getting real value or impact out of that. And, to Randy's point, for me, I think a lot of organizations are probably looking at AI as a cost-effective task workflow based tool. So if we can have AI take off, some of the responsibility of people's plates, then we can reduce our headcount, or we can reduce our cost, or we can deliver faster. I think one interesting parallel, going back to the Agile parallel, is if we use the technology, if we use AI to handle some of those more routine tasks, handle our workflows more efficiently, it gives us space, whether we're a leader or an individual contributor, it gives us space to do more creative work, to think deeper and bigger, to really take on some challenges that maybe we wouldn't otherwise take on. And I think that's a real opportunity that exists for organizations, of finding, again, where is AI really going to create impact for you? Obviously, understanding that human in the loop component, making sure that it's, we're not just letting something run fully autonomously, particularly if there's risk or something going on there, but really getting deep into how do we integrate this into our operating model, and how do we have that balance between having the humans who we hired because they're intelligent, they've got skills, allowing them to do new creative work while working with AI to help make that either more efficient or more creative, or even open up opportunities that they didn't know were there.
Yep. Building on that, Richard, one of the things that hit me as you were describing that is also the opportunity that leaders have to model more, more of their ability to deal with ambiguity and uncertainty. Like the AI challenge, as it were, I think it gives a catalyst leader perhaps a new opportunity to engage with their peers and engage with their higher ups in their organization, to model some of that behavior that they've probably used in the past, but now they've got like maybe like a new at bat with that, because the one pattern that seems to be omnipresent is a lot of people with VP and above in their titles and on the org chart. A pretty high percentage of those folks, in my experience, have gotten where they are despite their ability to deal with uncertainty and ambiguity, right? Like a lot of those leaders show up with this mentality that we just have to think through the thing, we just have to build a plan, and then we just have to execute the plan, where the most effective leaders that we've worked with understand that, yeah, have a plan, but like wherever it is we're trying to go, we know that we can't perfectly predict all the steps on that journey, and that we need to frequently reflect on, do we have the right goal? If we still have the right goal, like what are we seeing, and do we need to adapt our approach? So it's an opportunity for the right kind of leader who is able to really elevate the impact that they can deliver within their organization, to be able to do that. Sorry, I gotta.
Yeah, Richard, one thing that is always center to, adopting new technology, in this case, artificial intelligence, is having a good grasp of your internal data. A lot of good data platforms out there, create a data lake of, everything of value within your organization. There's great tools to do that, Snowflake or Databricks. Those are traditional tools for the most part. In other words, they don't have a lot of embedded AI They're really designed to activate your data, provide the governance around that data, allow data scientists and product and operations to, really manage that data holistically. Those are steps that have nothing to do with the AI technology, and has, tremendous benefit to an organization, even if they aren't planning on adopting artificial intelligence. So, what is your data strategy ahead of implementing those tools? Some organizations are very good at that, and some are very poor at that. The strategy around your data, practically speaking, is an important step in this process for your business and or for aspirations of adopting artificial intelligence. That requires leadership decisions on what and how and when and where, leadership in working with the organization to roll that out. And those are steps that can be taken benign of your AI aspirations that need to be in place in order to run your business successfully. And so that is all leadership, and that is all upstream of an actual AI strategy that is required for any business. You don't want to get into this innovator dilemma as an organization, because my view is the Fortune 500 is all going to be challenged over the next 3 years by upstarts that are coming after their business, that are AI native organizations. So you should be afraid of this innovator dilemma, and it should push you over the edge of analyzing to action. But this is all grounded in creating a vision, establishing the data governance, and getting buy-in across the organization, all upstream of implementing tools.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think that is a real and maybe underappreciated risk that you point out, Dan, of the upstarts. A couple of us could get together and build something that, in a traditional organization, a lot of bureaucracy exists, and just getting new product developed takes months, where now we're seeing things being delivered much, much faster. I want to tie this into, Randy, you were referencing Catalyst leadership. And so that's compared to expert level leadership and achiever level leadership from Bill Joyner's leadership agility model. And I think expert leaders are probably struggling mightily in this situation, because letting go, right? Expert leader is typically, I'm the expert, I've got everything has to run through me, I have all the answers, and everybody just follows my lead. And because now, if that expert leader is an AI expert, great, then go lead and be that champion. But my guess is there are a lot of people in that level, and expert leader isn't a bad thing. It's just a stage of leadership development. But I'm guessing there are a lot of leaders that are at that stage and are struggling because of the ambiguity, because of the fast, rapid pace that this is evolving, and the idea of letting go and recognizing, I don't have all the expertise anymore. All of a sudden, now I have to build a cohort. I need to build some alliances in my organization. I have to let go of things and allow my teams to have some autonomy. And that's a very scary thing, but it's still fundamental in the point that you were making earlier, both of you were making, is the foundational challenge of learning something new, adapting it into your organizational operating model. They're the same, right? You can separate the technology from the real challenge of it. And I think one of the things, Randy, you and I were talking about this, one of the key points we wanted to bring up is kind of, thinking of AI adoption as a project, which is a typical mindset in a lot of organizations for a lot of leaders. It was true with Agile. It was true with other things. Just think of it as a project, and we're going to go do this thing and hit the, implement button, and we're done. But really, it's about building a capability and being able to evolve and adapt that capability, to your point earlier, Randy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing I like about what you just said is the expert leader is characterized by one of two behaviors, as you said, just rolling up your sleeves and solving the problem on their own, or two, being highly directive and here's exactly what I want you, and you to go do, right? And the catalyst leader is going to be more focused on how do I create the right environment where learning is happening continually and we're evolving, we're growing. How do I stop these problems from getting put, on my proverbial desk, as it were? And how do I create the system around me so that I am empowering, enabling those around me, and looking at how does the system support that? How does the system support the learning and growth of everyone in the system, versus me thinking the problem I need to solve is, well, if I can just, build this autonomous agent and roll it out, then I have solved the problem. Like that's the wrong problem to be solving.
Look, there's lots of different types of leaders, but I often break them down into, team captain leader and team coach leader. Both can apply in this case, but if, what I mean by the team captain is, Elon Musk's great at that, where he is kind of the hub of the spoke and driving everything. A lot of, and that takes an extraordinary personality and individual in order to be able to scale that successfully. Team coach is really setting up the objectives, incubating their talent and creating a playing field that is advantageous to win. In both cases, you kind of need the same thing, is you have to have a framework that you can operate within so you can move fast and not be worried about breaking, policy or, making a mistake that gets you fired or in trouble or, snuffs out an initiative. In both cases, setting that playing field so your talent can sprint when they find openings in the strategy to, slip through and head for the goal line. That playing field requires certain things that have to be in place in order to maximize your team's values or their capabilities. And setting that field and that strategy, even dips into mindset and culture. A lot of times you might have the right process in place to support something like AI adoption, but if you have kind of a fear mentality, litigious mindset, the fear of the unknown might prevent you from actually taking those steps, even if you have a structure in place for that. So this goes beyond just leadership and vision and process and procedures and good technology implementation. This is a chance for every organization to really drill in on, is their culture optimized right for their business? And is it optimized right to take on these technology advancements in a way that's responsible and also yields the value potential that it employs? It's really an opportunity to reset eventually your whole organization's vision and governance, as well as culturally setting yourself up to win, because that culture is, more ethereal, I think, for a lot of people to envision and craft, and changing culture at an organization is tough. But I'd say that is the most important thing that you could be looking at, thinking through, understanding, and eventually strategizing on how to shift. because you can do all of the other things perfectly. And if you don't have the right culture to take advantage of that playing field, you'll get caught in your own axle, and an upstart in 1, 2, 3 years will come along and you'll start losing market share because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody that follows me online or has seen one of my conference talks, I think cultural awareness is the number one foundational building block for these things, for leadership in general, and certainly for dealing with change and transformation. And a couple of points you were making there, Dan, what kept popping into my head was this, I don't know if it's ironic or just obvious, is that fear, that uncertainty, whatever is maybe at risk, that we're facing, could be a constraint, is in this case, we can actually leverage generative AI to help us think through that and then find a path forward. And that's part of my learning journey with Gen AI has been partly that of, obviously I started as an absolute neophyte. I tiptoed into learning ChatGPT, but once I started really diving into it and learning other tools and platforms, I learned very quickly to leverage it to help me think through it, not just give me X and then I'm done, but help me think through this and give me different ways to think through it. And I think that's an interesting dynamic of generative AI for organizations, is that we can leverage generative AI to help us think through whether it's the strategy, our risk profile, mapping out our constraints, et cetera. And that, I think, is a powerful dynamic in that we can actually, we're using it, we're learning from it, we're adapting it. We're not simply looking at it as this big, ambiguous, uncertain, risky thing. We're actually grabbing the steering wheel and driving this thing the way we need to drive it, and learning from it as well. And I'm guessing that maybe two of you could share your experience, that you will find in some cases, all right, this is not the right application. This is not helping us optimize what we need to. And in other cases, we'll see that it very obviously can help drive value and help drive impact. But it's not going to be a pure binary activity, right? You need to iterate through it, and you need to be open about sharing kind of your experience with it, particularly in an organizational context, right? If it's just me working, independently, I can do and experiment all I want. But in an organizational context, if our system is not designed to help with transparency and to help with collaboration, we're going to have all these pockets of activity, but not representing a coherent, aligned strategy, in my opinion.
Yeah, I have a prompt for Dan. For those of you who might be listening and not be familiar with Dan's background, part of Dan's background is being a FANG, as it were. I think that acronym still holds, right? FANG. He was a FANG product executive. So, given your experience as a product executive, what's your top guidance for other product executives today around this whole conversation? Like, what's the one thing they should be doing and/or the one thing they should not be doing?
I think sobriety is important here. What I often advocate is, when there's organizational drag or resistance, often what is required, if you're not at the lead of an organization, you're an influencer within the organization, is and you're maybe advocating, let's say in this case, adoption of artificial intelligence. You instinctually kind of see and know the value of doing that, but your organization might be flat-footed. Is two things. One, I'd approach this at a crawl, walk, run approach. AI does hallucinate. You need a human in the middle of, certain steps. Those are best practices today. Maybe that'll change over time. The LLMs of the world are getting very good, but a lot of the innovation and value right now is implementing an agentic strategy. So AIs can talk to AIs and your systems and perform functions. It's still a little hokey out there, and it's really coming together fast, but the capabilities of these that can operate independent and provide value is there. But my recommendation, and I've done this several times in the past, is use your influence, use your position to establish some level of start, and use that start to prove the value. Be honest with yourself, be honest with the organization, point out the things that worked, you can correct, point out the things that didn't work, you can correct. But look at it as like an experiment, as a proof point to your leadership. So the velocity you can get with artificial intelligence is head spinning. So the value is there. My suggestion is figure out a way. Maybe you're still in the experimental stage of AI adoption, but figure out a way to benchmark what you do today, a new way to do it with these tools, and then compare and contrast the as-is state versus a potential future state. And then that puts you in, if you do it right and you prove the value and you prove the technology and approach, that puts you in a leadership stance within the organization to prove out the value here, and then exponentially start to adopt those approaches across other organizations and other functions. So that crawl, walk, run, proving value, and then scaling with that crawl, walk, run mentality, I think is, it's good advice for anybody within an organization, particularly the product function, which often is looking at what's new and next for your customers or internal users or your business partners.
Yeah, love it. The one thing that I hear in that, I go back to a lot of my experiences working with leadership teams, and I always have this really strong leaning of like empathy towards the product leaders in the organization, because I've seen all too frequently they might be overly trusting in the capabilities that their peers bring, and I've seen the dynamic where the product leader comes in, they might be new in the organization or new in the role, and they have technology partners that maybe are, not quite up to the task. And so I like what you said. Like, my interpretation of what you said is it's sort of a trust but verify, right? Like, don't completely abdicate everything to your technology partners. Be willing to lean in enough and be an engaged partner. Don't just be hands off and trust that they're doing the right things, because they might not be doing all the best things that are going to most impact product's ability to deliver market impact.
Yeah. Yeah, and often the product manager is a thoughtful position within an organization, because inevitably they have to interact with the executives, they have to interact with legal, they have to interact with sales and sales ops. Of course, they have to interact with engineering and development and all of the permutations around developing code and deploying and supporting code in production. They have to interact with the marketing teams. In other words, they're a hub within your own organization that have inevitably good relations and access to a lot of the functions within the organization. So and they know their discipline. They know, their discipline in context to marketing and context to engineering. And so they're a bit of an expert. I almost see, product executives as kind of like growing, incubating, CEOs, because they have to interact with, all parts of the organization. They're in a good position, especially around their mentality, a minimum viable product. How do you crawl, walk, run into some of these capabilities? And I've always thought, part of a job of a product owner is having a good product factory. You're only as fast as your loosest link and your weakest link in the chain. So as a product executive, I often look at where those links are, those weak links are, and try to shore them up in order to get organizational velocity for developing and deploying products. So it's a good position to include in the team, that is looking to adopt artificial intelligence. It also could be a good incubator for, some initial steps, but they have the right mindset and, access internally to the organization to pilot some of these things. But like with most new technologies and new processes and stuff that touches your culture, you really have to, start constrained, and prove value, and then learn and build on that value as you proceed. So, most all of what I'm talking about has nothing to do with actual tooling and technology. It has to do with mindset and approach within an organization to prove value and grow that value.
Yeah, something you just said prompted me to want to prompt Richard, knowing his passion and depth when it comes to working with organizations around culture. What is one consistent pattern, habit, set of behaviors that exist in a lot of cultures that may have made sense in the past, but that's holding those organizations back now?
That's a great question. I'm struggling just to break it down to one pattern.
Yeah.
Because there are many, right? We all know there are many patterns that we can point to. But I'll respond this way. So, what Dan was just referencing, for product, let's talk about product executives, product leaders, a really good organizational culture component would be around innovation and what we call competitive culture or market culture. So if your organization is predominantly already a competitive, market-driven, product-driven culture, the pattern is likely going to be, it's just very much about competing and hard driving and, adapting what you've been doing in the past, your past patterns with AI is probably a little bit more straightforward, a little bit less friction or tension going on there. However, if your organization is more of a traditional hierarchical organization, or even one that is more of a social or a collaborative clan-based organization, you're going to be at tension. And so the patterns of, and it was alluded to earlier, so for the controlling type culture and the leaders that align with that, the pattern is we have our policies, we've got our processes, everybody needs to follow the processes, and we've got a clear chain of command. And while that's important and that holds up, that's going to hit some interference with AI, as we've talked about. So because it's moving so quickly, and again, of that ambiguity, and if we want people to really have some autonomy to start to lean in on this and adapt it, there's going to be some patterns that you're going to have to either break or modify. You've got to be willing, if you're a leader, you need to be willing to break or modify some of those patterns. I think one pattern, I referenced collaborative and a clan-oriented culture. I think you can actually leverage that pattern of we all want to work together and we want to support each other in the spirit of what we've talked about so far today of really leveraging that pattern. So while there's a little bit of natural tension with that hard driving, innovative, market focused, we have to be the best in the market. That's an important pattern that I think we need to be doubling down on. So let's say the three of us represent three different parts of a hierarchy in an organization. We may typically kind of stay in our lane, and we may not collaborate much. But I think what we're seeing with AI is that it's changing the game, and it's forcing some collaboration. It's forcing us to kind of break down or at least soften some of those silos so that we can be more collaborative, where the pattern may have been, I stay in my lane. If I really need to, Randy, I'll come talk to you. But, 4 days out of the week or 38 hours out of the week, we just don't even cross paths. And I think that's changing. I think that's a necessary pattern that we'll need to lean in on more collaboration, and also make sure that we're removing the constraints and the barriers to that collaboration when we need to.
Love it.
Where my mind goes is really building a system of accountability. Let's say an LLM will get a hallucination 1 in 100 times, and you're like, no, we can't have that. The reality of the situation is humans mess up, 1 in 100 times or some ratio. And, you have this mentality of, either blame and shame, or, accountability, which is learn and correct. And I think you have to design and implement AI systems and features and functionality with kind of that system of accountability. How do you audit against mistakes? How do you triangulate on those mistakes? And, how do you correct those mistakes? Similar to process improvement, similar to, nurturing your employees internally for better trust and accountability. It's for those that are very tied to kind of that command and control management style, this becomes uncomfortable for them. Mm-hmm. But, you have to look at setting up artificial intelligence implementations similar to hiring and empowering employees. You have to assume mistakes are going to be made. You have to assume that there's an opportunity to learn from that mistake and correct it. I think these tools, because there's thinking involved, legitimate, connections that are made that you can't go and point to directly because it's within an algorithm. But you can look at all the upstream data that goes into that and all the downstream activity that comes out of that, and create a way to audit that function and look for those mistakes, because those mistakes are like, training your employees. As they make mistakes, they learn, they improve. Think of AI as kind of, one of those employee functions. They're not people, they're systems, but they're systems that think. And so it's not like, everything is 1 + 1 = 2. Everything isn't necessarily trackable. But you can't track what's going on inside a human head either. You can look at the upstream inputs and the downstream outputs, put in safeguards, not to, penalize so much as an opportunity to learn and adjust. And that system of accountability, I think, is extremely important in organizations, whether you're adopting AI or not. But because you're, in essence, maybe not today, but over time, you're hiring, digital employees to, work functions within your organization. I'm not saying treat them just like employees necessarily, but I am saying, treat the process like an employee is in the middle, and look at it as an opportunity. Those mistakes harden your process. They harden your business. If you can catch them and learn from them and improve the process around them.
Yeah, that brought an interesting thought to mind for me. So fast forward 3 years. And let's say like the typical organization today, like they time warp into this 3-year ahead timeline, and they're working exactly the way they work today. How would everybody react to, like, what would show up as, like, you know, the big red flag that it's like, what are you all doing? Like, why are you doing these things? Like, that's 3 years ago. Nobody does that anymore. What are the things that a company that would fast forward into that 3-year ahead timeline, what would the other people in that timeline be pointing at as outdated?
Oh, from my perspective, I mean, I've thought a lot about as AI tools in the agentic world improve, and they're improving at lightning speeds, faster than anything I've experienced, likely faster than anything anybody's experienced. You kind of have to start to look at, you know, what do you concentrate the human aspect of this down to? If you concentrate our essence, and this is going to be in 3 years, it's moving that fast. You know, humans have wisdom. They have agency. Now, agency arguably could get taken over by AI at some point, but I don't think that's happening in the next 3 years. And you have connections and relationships. So, you know, the idea of the human in the middle, you know, you're providing the long-term memory of a system. Again, those capabilities will improve within the agentic and AI world over time. But you know, you're a human. You have wisdom. You have relationships. You have agency, and you have long-term memory around objectives and goals. And so, if you're involved in you know, anything other than those activities within your organization, you're wasting your time, because an AI or an agent could do the same. So you're actually decreasing your effectiveness and value within the organization. So I would, you know, really strive for concentrating your activities, your thoughts, your focus to the things that are uniquely human, and leverage the technology that's uniquely positioned to automate a lot of the mundane and the procedural and the, you know, deep technical thinking around things, and almost, you know, propagate yourself up to being that team coach within, you know, this set of tools or technologies. And so you're directing, you're using your long-term wisdom in order to make decisions on strategy, direction, pivots, priority, and let the machines do the things that the machines are good at, so you can concentrate your essence and develop that essence and blossom that essence. So that really couples well with this technology for you know, kind of a competitive approach to creating value that I think is gonna, you know, put some at a huge advantage over others if you know, if you adopt kind of that mindset correctly.
Yeah, I thought I was out of ideas to contribute, and you just sparked one more. I think the notion of value creation is going to evolve. I think so many organizations today continue to be highly focused on what is the work that it has been assigned to us to deliver, versus really understanding what does value mean for our context, and how can we take a more dynamic and emergent approach where, like, more new ideas are explored more rapidly, versus today where, like, things have to go through such a process to make it into, like, the list of work that the organization is focused on. I think if you fast forward, you know, 2 or 3 years, certainly my hope is that there's more of a loose coupling between understanding value and, like, what work we're gonna tackle, and that there's greater autonomy and the ability to react to new opportunities much more quickly. One of the things we were talking about earlier, you talked about upstarts disrupting, incumbents in markets. I mean, it's amazing to me how frequently a really critical strategic conversation gets kicked down the road 3 weeks before we can find more time slots on the calendar. It's like, you want to talk about leadership impact, go fix that. You've got a strategic imperative that you need to talk about. And yeah, it's important to get the right people together, but you can't get those people together for 3 weeks. You're in trouble.
Well,
I forget go ahead.
Go ahead, Dan.
No, I forget the matrix or what they call it, but in essence, where your mindset and your focus should always gravitate towards is things that are highly important that are not urgent. And where do we usually find ourselves? Stuff that's extremely urgent, that's not important. And so if you think of, just a basic function, like I remember reading the average time spent at the large organization combing your intranet and documents and looking for information in order to put a presentation together or a sales pitch or whatever it is you're doing. The average time somebody spends, what I call, intranet surfing, is about 2 hours a day. Now, you implement something like a RAG within your organization. Now finding that information is 1 or 2 prompts. You get exactly what you want with confidence. You've just saved yourself 2 hours a day. What do you do with that 2 hours a day? That's where you try to really recoup that tendency to be in low important, highly urgent tasks, to really go to that, more long-term, very important tasks that aren't urgent. So you can start digging yourself out of this urgency around, trivial things, to think deeper, to plan longer, to be more prepared, look around corners. That type of, just recouping 2 hours a day around of your time. You have to be thoughtful around how you redeploy that time. And it has a tremendous opportunity to really get into being, concentrating your essence as a human down to that wisdom, those connections, that understanding of, long-term agency. This is really going to make yourself as a productive part of the team, as well as your organization, extremely focused in on value, as opposed to executing the task of the day.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think Dan preempted me a bit. I was going to say competing priorities compounded by the tyranny of urgency, right? And again, we see this in virtually every organization I've worked with, and I've had a very long coaching consulting career. Virtually every organization has that in common. There's more demand than capacity, and it's hard to say no. So we're constantly struggling and juggling competing priorities. The tyranny of the urgent keeps popping up and sucks our energy and attention where maybe it shouldn't. So I think that's definitely a pattern, a constraint that all of us have and all of us need to deal with. I'll give my kind of closing thought as we're getting close to the top of the hour here to your question, Randy, about looking back 3 years. And I think your prompt was, if the organization doesn't change anything, essentially keeps its operating model, keeps its way of working as is, what would that conversation be 3 years from now? And I think the combination in that scenario, the conversation is going to be a mix of, well, you know what? Those leaders aren't here any longer. We've lost our competitive advantage. Remember the days when we dominated our market, and now we've lost market share. In some cases, there will be, corporate extinction. Companies may not exist if they're truly standing pat. They're just going to dig in their heels and keep doing things the same way in the face of this, this major, technological phenomenon. I think you're going to have some combination of that. Obviously, a lot of organizations are going to survive it if they remain basically the same. But a lot of organizations, that's the conversations. Like, remember when we had competitive advantage. Remember when we were, the top of our market. Remember when we had those great leaders that, that had a vision, but we didn't know how to execute. So I think that's the reality that organizations are going to have to confront. So now on the plus side, adapting to change is certainly something we can all learn to do. And we can, as leaders, we can learn new patterns. And as was discussed already, I think Dan, you called out a couple of times, is taking that mindset of learning and recalibrating our system, recalibrating our processes, recalibrating our governance. And again, this is why agility still matters. It still matters that we have the ability to have fast feedback loops, that we're being transparent, and that we're being adaptive, particularly in the face of this, this AI challenge for organizations. So I think most organizations would probably push back strongly that we're not just going to stand pat, we're not doing nothing. But the question is, again, what are you able and willing to adapt, and what are you going to dig your heels in on? And I also want to call out, when we were talking about culture and we were talking about command and control, there's a reason why, if that's part of your culture as an organization, there's reason why that exists, right? It's not just because people like to control or people don't trust people. That may be a behavior that you see, but that's probably not the rationale. So I always think it's important to note that whatever your culture orientation is within your organization, it's valuable. It had, and probably still has value, and still will have value. So this is not a question of we need to get rid of all command and control thinking, because when we're facing uncertainty or risk, and hallucinations was brought up, I think that's manageable. But this idea of having agents, autonomous agents doing things is very risky. Is we don't want to just dispatch that mindset, because there's value there. The question is, how do we adapt it, right? How do we find where we can make the adjustments? How do we find where we can either expand or reduce kind of the overhead of that? And I think the other thing is, which was just alluded to, is essentially the artificial stage gates that we create, right? Because of whatever, either because we don't trust decision making or because this is just the way we've always done things, is that I think the rapid pace of Gen AI is pressure testing those stage gates and those decision trees. So how can we get to a decision faster so that we can move forward? And I think that's one of the areas that will likely have to require some serious thinking about, do we really need to keep those stage gates in place? Can we streamline or make our decision making more efficient? But we have to be able to do that in a way that still creates safety and keeps us within certain boundaries as an organization.
Love it.
And Richard, I'll say one thing that I think kind of supports that is, be very suspect of your sunk costs. And what I mean by that is the way most people calculate their sunk costs is, leads them to plow through with projects and keep investing on top of existing investments. One of the things I think, came out of my experience at working at Amazon was, every day is day one. Always think of today as day one, which means, you can, look at everything as it is today and make the best decision off the information that you have today. Often when somebody invests like heavily in, let's say, a data science department or tool or team, and that's not really appropriate for today, but because you've already spent X number of dollars and or people hours on that sunk cost has to be carried forward. I would, go so far to say is try to eliminate that thinking in your mindset and look at today as a fresh start and treat it as such. So you become unbound and unshackled from your sunk costs, whether that's system, procedures, focus, whatever it may be, because things have changed enough where those sunk costs are now a liability to your thinking. And you ought to, really be thinking, today as a fresh start, and based off of that, what is the best thing that I could be doing with my time and focus moving forward, and not get caught up in evaluating the risks or advantages of leveraging your sunk costs. They're there if it fits what's happening in day one, but by no means should you be shackled by that.
Yeah, I think that's a good mindset to have. And apropos, as we wrap up current year 2025 and start looking into the new year and seeing what opportunities are in front of us as an organization. So thanks for sharing that, Dan. Any final closing comments, Randy or Dan, before we close it out today?
May the rest of the year be joyous and regenerative for everyone.
Have an open mindset. What you've learned the last 5, 10, 20 years doesn't apply anymore. Everything has changed, and really digest that. And, I think we're at the foot of a new era, and the prosperity that's going to come out of this is going to be tremendous. But there's also going to be tremendous amount of change, which most of us, me included, scares me. It gives me anxiety, and have a mindset to ride this wave. Don't get crashed in it.
Yeah,
it's going to be an exciting time for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so it's a real opportunity, I think, for organizational leaders to adapt and to really help create space for their organization to learn. So I agree. I'm really excited and looking forward to what is in front of us all. And for those of you out there that are struggling with this concept, not sure where to go next, if you're struggling with having conversations within your organizations about what AI means to your organization and how you go about adopting it, the three of us have put together a little workshop that we've been running. We've got one scheduled for January, so you can check the QR code here. But it's a lightweight workshop where we expose some opportunities for people to think about how they can accelerate AI within their organization. So thank you both for joining again today. Great conversation, and look forward to the next conversation we can have. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.